Hello! Today you may have noticed that I've joined up with Keith from Yawning Angel Retro.
Hello.
Because today we have the absolute honour of welcoming a special guest, François Lionet.
Hello, very happy to be here. Hello, Rob. Hello, Keith.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me. First, I would just want to say, I have proof. My tongue is very thick on one side. I bite myself on Friday, and I had to go to the urgencies. So it's slowly coming back to normal, but please forgive the way I talk. That's just a good day.
So I'd like to get a bit of background about you first, and possibly not computer related. So some of the things that you maybe done in the background. So I think you've mentioned you did a bit of improv and theatre. I think I've even read somewhere that you went to veterinary school. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, well, I was born in a quite wealthy family. My father was a very good engineer, major of France in the most difficult school of the time, Les Arts des Métiers, in 57 something after the war. And he was chief engineer, and it really was worth at the time. I mean, metal. So when we lived in Maubeuge, on the north of France, he was the chief engineer of the iron factory, La Fabrique de Fer. So we had a house with a garden, we had a cleaning lady, we had a gardener, we had a car, a Peugeot 403, I remember everything, you know. It really was someone like him, not like today, you know, engineers, they weren't worth nothing, but at the day, yeah. And then I moved to Metz, where we had a wonderful apartment and in the posh place. So I had a really cool childhood. And as my father was an engineer, he introduced me to a good toy, not Lego. Lego today is okay, you know, but still, you know, it's a question of the bricks in Lego, they go like that. You know, they should go like this, but the nature of Lego is upside down, so you cannot do much with this. Whereas Fisher Technique is really a good toy for me. So all my childhood, I made machines for about everything. And when I was 18, just on the summer before I went into vet school, I bought my first computer, which was a Superboard Ohio Scientific tool. So during the whole year, I was cleaning the windows and saving the money, because it was like expensive for the time, at 2,500 francs, which was cheap for as well 1981. You know, it was the best little card, and it had a keyboard, memory 4K, video output, cassette output 300 baud, and 6502, and a really cool Microsoft Basic, and no power supply, and blah blah blah, and that thick of documentation, photocopy, etc. So yeah, I started to make a game in Basic, another one. Then I saw, well, it's too slow. So I saw on the dog there was a monitor. You know, when you press escape or Control C on this machine, you go to a machine language monitor that allows you to enter 6502 programs. So I made my assembler in Basic. You know, I bought a book with the instructions, LDA, etc. There are not many. You know, 6502 is simple. So I made like a monitor. I typed the instruction, it put the code, and then I make games. And then I entered in September the vet prep. So I was coding in math and in English. And the exams, we have oral exams. At the end, I got it on the first year with a number 3 in France. I'm sorry. And then I went into the vet school in Lyon. And what was cool, I went to the courses like for 1 week, 15 days. You had courses in the afternoon and practical things in the morning. So you had to go to the morning, but in the afternoon, there was a service of a student going to the course and making polycops, photocopy of the courses. So after 15 days, I just realized I didn't need to go to the courses at the vet school. And I have been programming since every afternoon of the vet school during 4 years. Yeah. Using my friend, on the second year, I was living with a friend of mine called Six, with a mustache, etc. And he was testing my game. He was testing driver, he was testing bearing, and this kind of thing. That was good times.
Wow.
Amazing.
But I don't know, you just have to know that when I was 13, my father died. So the happy childhood. And then, but still.
So did you have brothers or sisters, Francois? Were you only child?
I have two older brothers.
Okay.
One is a cardiologist in Tahiti.
Okay.
He's born in 55, so he should be 70 years today. Well, this year. And the other one is a dentist, and he lives in Brittany.
Oh, right.
Awesome.
It's the family of doctors,
Yeah.
So obviously you started programming at, I guess, quite an early age. How did that progress? And obviously you started to make some games. Did any of those get released, or were they published?
Yeah. Well, the game I did on the Super Bowl, they were impossible to sell. I was the only one in France with this machine, I guess. That must be me. It was quite popular in England, but in America, yes, it was. But the one I got was a very small ad, in this big English magazine of the time.
Mhm.
And what's that? And it didn't work very well because it was NTSC, so I had the picture completely like that. And I had to order in England at the same shop a car to solder on, etc. And it was right after that, 32 by 32. But the first machine on which I made a game was the OREC one.
Okay.
And I made Driver. So the image on the left is the title page of Driver. And, because I thought that in all my game, I always put a title page and scoreboard. That's essential. And this is the actual game screen. The game was, chains of cars inside of a maze. And the car, when you press space, it left some smoke, and the smoke was blocking the enemy cars. That's all. And you had some fuel and things like that to get, and a map on the right. Scrolling was okay. It was X, so it was flashing a bit. I could, but at the time I didn't know about the interrupt. So, but by interrupt, I could have got a good display. But it was a good game, and it sold like 2,000 copies on the first month, and it did pay for a complete summer of skydiving.
Awesome.
Oh my God.
I am a kind of I like this kind of sport.
That's something I would never have known about you, that you were into skydiving.
No
And
way.
it was in the time, there was at the vet school, there was a guy on second year, I think, because Driver was on the summer of the first year at the vet school. So he sold during there. there was a guy that was into skydiving, and he made a presentation. Wow, I want to do it. But at the time, it was the round. I started with the real round ones and the long packing table and all this. I had it was good.
Wow.
Fantastic.
But it's expensive, so wow.
Something I could never do. I could never jump out of a perfectly serviceable aircraft. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, but I just wonder why you've got drones. Why use airplanes? You just put a nice drone with a liberation mechanism. You're just tied to a big drone. And then,
that's not a bad idea.
It wouldn't cost very much. And in between jumps, it goes charging, and you just have 10 for one drop zone, and that's it. And if you want to do like 20% at the same time, and that's it.
There we go.
That would be so much better.
It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. And cheaper.
True.
Yeah,
Very
definitely.
true. Obviously, you would have moved on from the Auric. And did you move straight to the Atari, or was there something in between that?
After the Auric was with a publisher called Dialogue Informatique. It was created by a really cool guy that presented little jokes. The famous French game creation group, which was two commercial guys, Jacques and Frédéric, that were out of kind of business school. And there was one who was more into graphic artists. It was Frédéric, and Jacques was the more commercial one. And they wanted to do something in the video game business, so they invited me to the group in a kind of hush manner. You're going to get into something. They were doing as they were told at the business school, basically with me. And we signed some charts that had no legal weight. I saw it, what's that? But I wanted so much to get into there. And we started to make games. The first game I made was Qu'as-tu vu? It was a memory game on the Commodore 64, and this one was done in BASIC. It was a really good principle of a game made by someone called Rodolphe. It was famous at the time. And I draw, it's a bit crappy, it's in BASIC, but a big elephant representing the memory, and but it was in BASIC with big sprites. And then we went on other games, and they had this game too, called Cock-In. And at the time, we didn't know that the name was so possible in English, Cock-In. Oops. And it was a game about a chicken with a hen inside a little house, and he has to go inside. And when he has done it enough, you have an egg that is in it's kind of much than this kind. You couldn't do this kind of game today. The lady hen just out of the house and climb the stairs and lay the eggs. But before the eggs are born, you have to protect them. So you have to climb the stairs and protect the eggs against the animals that comes to eat the eggs. So it's just it was very well calibrated. We did play a lot. There is a fight when to stay inside, leaving the eggs exposed. Basically, when you don't protect the eggs and all this. So it was quite a success actually, and for England, it was renamed to Chicken Chase and not Cock-In, of course. So this one I did on Commodore 64. I did first on Auric, Commodore 64, Amstrad, and that's it.
And then Atari ST, I'm guessing, at this point.
At the end of the vet school in 1986, I decided to go with 3 friends of mine at the school, vets. They wanted to specialize in the Paris vet school. In Paris, it's a bigger school. You have more specialization than in Lyon. So we rented a house near the Maison Alfort vet school, and had a room. It was a very Parisian house, nice. And we had the bottom ground, and I had a room there. And soon I got, at the time, because I had the royalties of my games, I could buy the Atari ST, and I set up my office in Paris. I wanted, in fact, to work in Paris, because France is very centric on this kind of thing, and the only place where you have to be at the time, especially, is Paris. And no one was working online at the time as well. So Jacques and Frédéric introduced me to a Greek programmer called Constantin Soteropoulos. Constantin for the STOS. And I mean, this guy was very Greek, the most Greek person ever, and a complete dog system, Linux, Atari monitor text guy. The worst Linux command line. So STOS was to be a replacement to them on the Atari ST, which could have been nice if it was not so crap. It could have been nice, but it was so crap. Especially in low res. I mean, they could have divided the size of the icon by 2 with low res. Come on. This kind of thing. And could make the icon divided by 4. That would have been enough, and the system would have been great with divided the size of the big, large icon by 4. We decided to make a replacement that was to be DOS, made by Constantin Soteropoulos, a version of DOS specially made for the Atari ST, and a BASIC, because that was how it was organized at the time. You had a DOS and a BASIC, and I started on to STOS like that.
Okay.
In Paris.
And obviously, STOS was massively popular. And
well, not at first.
Nothing ever is, though.
Before going to England, first STOS was published in France by a publisher called Cédric Nathan, which was, at the time you had big publishing house that didn't know anything about game, but had a lot of money and wanted to get into the game, wanted to get there. So they accepted, because Jacques and Frédéric was very well in this kind of place and people, and could contact them and make them demos. And we had the first version of STOS, blue big box saying STOS Basic. You don't know what it is. Is it? You don't know. So basically, it didn't sell. Minus 50. So after this big flop at the end of 87, Jacques and Frédéric took STOS in the suitcase and went to England and started to go and demo it to publishers. And when they arrived at Europress in Manchester, well, they had sent the demo before, of course, and they went there to complete the contract. They made an infamous demo of, you put a sprite, you make it move to the left and to the right, and then you do list. And you have the program under the sprite. Which is, when you think about it today, I mean, it's easy. There's nothing to it, but at the time, wow. So, and it was not Europress at the same time. It was Mondelling Software, and there was the CEO, Chris Payne, who was, this kind of little guy with like a lemon, with the little English kind, very pop of ideas, always smiling. And you had Richard Vanner, I say, wow, okay, let's get rid of the dark side and make a nice box and put Dipper, who's still alive today. And that was it. And yes, this version was a hit.
Did you gear it specifically towards game development, or was it
Oh, yeah.
just everything?
When I wrote it, I wanted to make games, and I wanted others as well to make games, make the routine once for all, and you got Sprite, and that's it. A game engine. And of course, Chris Payne and Richard Vanno and all the team at Your Press, they saw the potential of, publishing it as only for game. Because in England at the time, it was just after the end of the BBC series about computers with, the BBC computer, the absolutely great machine. So, and all England was, all about games and technology. And it must have been a great period to be English at the time, to be young at the time. I mean, in England, and you had Lord Sinclair, and you had everyone, the Tangerine team fighting together and all this. Only in England, because I think in England you've got it's an island first, and somehow you manage to oppose yourself. When you fight, you'd always do it with class, like a fight, but with gloves. Not like in America, so I want to kill your company. Yeah, my product is going to be better and sooner and cheaper than yours. Lord Sinclair. Something like that. So I was lucky, just be at the good place at the good time. Yeah. Otherwise, and with the good people, Your Press was 50% of the market of computer magazine at the time. So it helps. Of course, it helps.
It was a very rich time, because I think we had a lot of the magazines, because you had, for me, I started off with the Sinclair Spectrum. And so I used to get a lot of the magazines and all the type-in listings. And that's what started me off. That was my interest. It's like, well, okay, well, this is how, and you're kind of learning how the language kind of works, and you think, I can do this a bit better, I can change this. And that was kind of the doorway into programming for me before then learning it, schools and colleges and all the rest of it. So,
and I've been in England, 10-year-old kid, 12, at the time of STOS. I would have been in the back of the yard at school, discussing with a couple of geeks. What have you done? What have you done? Etc.
Yeah. I remember for me at college, we were using BBC Micros, and lunchtimes were going back into the computer labs just to code. Yeah, it was just because it was exciting. It was all new. It was fresh, and it was.
Of course.
Yeah, and when you're young as well, you have that creative spark, and you just want to learn. You just want to drink it all in and just understand how all this stuff works.
And it's quick result. You don't have a real high expectation. You just want to move one character or one pixel.
And I think that was the joy, because at the time there were no standards. There were no everyone did their own thing. It was kind of a bit like the Wild West, but that's how it all evolved, and that's how people learned. So
and look at how many stars pop up. Other stars in computers, and England was number one in the world up to 2000, something like that. Yep. There was no question.
Yeah.
My programming experience didn't start on the Atari, it didn't start on the Commodore 64, it started on the Amiga, and it started with AMOS. And that's where my entire history and my future career came from. So I'd wondered if you could start us off by explaining how you jumped to the Amiga and then what happened with AMOS.
Okay, so for starts, it was in 88. Your Press was a publisher, we didn't have any specific relationship with the machine or not. The machine is a machine for publisher. So after STOS compiler and Prices 600 and this kind of thing, they were considering a version on the Amiga because the sales of the Amiga were going up and sales of the Atari were going down. So they asked me, do you want to make a version of AMOS on the Amiga? I said, of course. It was the dream machine of the time, but it was expensive, especially in France. With the TV system, you needed to have one extra box inside of the Amiga to convert the display to the French TVs. So I did 500 francs to the machine.
Wow.
And I opened it. It was a terrible job, but it kind of worked. So yeah, I got an Amiga. At the same time, Karine, my future wife, and I, we went together, and we got an apartment on the north of Paris, in Creil. So it was, the happy life. I had the Commodore 64 desk and all this. And the Amiga as well, and it was the beginning of life. And she was a vet, of course, and she was working for a vet clinic in Creil with a very Belgian guy, fat and really fun, and it was a good time. And we had the trainway station just 50 meters, Paris-Lille, at night, but that's life. And then I had to do my military service when AMOS started. But I pushed it as much as I could. As a vet, I could. But when I was 27, I had to do my military service. It was mandatory at the time. So I did it as a vet, as an officer. I would have been stupid not to. And I went to a one called Libourne during 1 month of the classes. Yeah, but it was for officers, so I could have a room out of the barracks. I arrived there with my little Renault 4 4L, full of Amigas, Amiga 500, the hard drive, and there was a printer. And it was packed. And the landlord was an old lady. Wow, what are you going to put the place and this kind of thing? And they installed my Amigas, and I was working at night and walking there and doing the stuff without really being there. Always last in the physical training, last walking at the end. And so at the end of this month, I was before last, and out of 100, but the choices were made from better to last. And of course, the first one, I got Haiti or Guadalupe or these kind of things. And on the last one, there was the towns where no one wants to go. And Metz, the town where my mother lived, Metz, was the last one, because it's in the east and it's a really pleasant town, but it's a military town at the time. So of course I could go there and I could work at my mother's house, stay there. My future wife was not really happy that I go there for 1 year, but that was okay. And I went on my moped to the barracks, the vet barrack, and there I could get something like that, 2 meters by 2 meters, no window. It was really hot with the heater and this kind of things. And I installed my Amigas, and I was working on AMOS there and bringing the hard drive on my moped and plugging it at home and doing like that. That was development of AMOS.
Wow. That is fascinating.
I'm working online, At the time, since STOS, I've been working online, 100% online with modems. 1200, where I was sending STOS 1200 modem.
I mean, that sounds fascinating. So when you were developing AMOS, and it's a question I was going to ask a little bit later about AMOS Pro, but in terms of AMOS, you're creating the language, but then the things like the manual and the documentation and stuff. So how did you bring that to bear as well? Did you do that in tandem? Or?
Thank you, Richard Vanner. Thank you, your press. For STOS, I did some documentation, but a programmer should not be the one making the documentation. Today it's okay, ask a model, but before, no. So your press did a great job of sharing in a box, and nice one, very professional work.
Yeah.
That's also very important. That's half, even more than half.
Yeah. I got to admit, so for me, this thing, It's always out. It sits by the bed sometimes. I lie in bed at night and I read bits.
You know what was the biggest mistake of AMOS Professional? The name. It had nothing professional. It should have been called AMOS 2.
Right, okay.
Interesting.
We were pretending to be professional, so people who bought it thinking it was professional.
Yeah.
There was a lot of problems compared to GFA or Blitz. Of course, this more creative and German, they make languages and make good engines. So, of course, at the end, the GFA facing STOS was going, of course, to win. And Blitz, not GFA because on the Amiga it was crap, but Blitz was good and of course won. But had we call AMOS Professional AMOS 2,
right,
then it would have been easier, I think.
Yeah. I think the thing for me that appeals, I mean, my kind of programming career was, once I'd finished college and I had some jobs in retail, and then I went in 96, started programming on IBM AS400s for a health insurance company. I started off as a junior programmer. 23 years later, I left. I was a web developer.
Cards?
No, we weren't cards. No, we just moved on from there. So we were using RPG3 as our main language. Then I moved to RPG4, which was more object orientated. Then the company got rid of all of that.
Big floppy like that?
Yeah, the big drums for the discs. Yeah, it was massive big machine room full of kit. We had 3 AS400s on site. They were big units, but after that, the company went to the Java route, and we got rid of all of that. I went down J2EE, so it was all Oracle installed and all the rest of it. But when I eventually left, and when I finished my programming career 23 years later, I was web development manager. So I'd moved into web development and headed up a team and all the rest of it. So I've used so many different systems through the years professionally. Yeah. And then now, when I look at the likes of AMOS Pro and the environment that it presented then, I don't think back then I appreciated how good that was in terms of the whole package, in terms of your, creating your sprites, your bobs, all your audio management, the whole environment. Yeah. Was advanced, was ahead of its time.
It's a tool I wanted to use.
Yeah.
When do you want to use the tool you make the good tool.
It had everything you needed straight away out of the box.
When I went for coming on the Amiga, I was not going to copy paste the code. Of course not. It would have been the GFA on the Amiga. Copy paste doesn't work. Me, I just went on the copy list and I started by making the copy list, especially the screen stopping at the end. And it's a lot more difficult because you have to recreate the screen when it's come back. So it's like sausage, cutting sausages. Right. I spent like 1 week on this routine, and one morning, it works. Because you have the copper, the space of the copper with the palette that has to be taken into account in all the offsets. And you cannot mix 2 lines, so it has to be blinded for the other one. So it was not easy to make. And this one, I never touched it.
No, I think I tried recently. I think I put Blitz on one of my Amigas. And I fired it up and I kind of looked at it and sort of blinked and went, quit. And then went back to AMOS. AMOS is just a comfortable environment. And I think that's
comfortable. Comfortable. That's it. And it was obvious that in AMOS Pro, using the Workbench 2.0 look, make it look nice. I was using machine language editors with multiple windows. Of course, put it in this just a screen, just a space in the memory with a copper for display because it's already done. The editor of AMOS Pro, I did it in 1 month.
Wow.
Because there's nothing, everything was made before. I was assembling, basically. And changing the look, and that's it. And it was, and the back, it was a nice carrosserie. It was a nice outside, but behind it was AMOS still.
Sure.
With more instruction, but still it was AMOS with the flaws and some crashes and all this. But that's why, it was the only, and it was not even a dual press magazine. It got 10 out of 10 for the first review for a magazine published by a competitor. And because they said, wow, the answer, it was cool. And the journalist, he got sacked because he only had problem after that.
Okay.
But it didn't last long. AMOS Pro was like that.
It's a shame. I think it's one of those things that people didn't appreciate it at the time.
Yeah.
I think maybe it was a...
Well, there was a F1 help. That one of the first to have that.
Yeah, very helpful.
Like the accessory for the STOS, you press help and F1, you have the sprite editor. Because I wanted to be quick. I've got the sprites, I will save on the floppy. Put the sprite editor. Put the sprite. Click. 5 minutes later. No.
And I think that's the beauty of it, because you can get into it. You're in that environment. You don't have to come out, and you can create something incredibly quickly.
That's it.
And get results incredibly quickly up and running. You get something visual on the screen moving around or whatever, like you say, to your sprite. Get a bob on the screen, and then joystick control, collision detection, the masking and all that. It's just all there.
It's a game engine.
Absolutely.
Everything to make a game.
But that's the interesting thing. So for me, with all languages and all the way through my time, if a language is like, well, this language is just for doing serious stuff, or this language is just for games, or this language is for that, I think doesn't matter. I'm going to try and do everything on everything. So with AMOS, you can do the serious stuff as well. It's there. If you want to do it, you can do it. Just one of my claims to fame, when we had some downtime when I first started work on the AS400s, some of the projects dried up, so they wanted to keep us busy. So we actually wrote a text adventure on an AS400. It was based on Warhammer, so the Space Hulk stuff, and you kind of moved. It was almost like a first-person shooter, but a text-based first-person shooter. But it was that kind of thing we could do, because it's like, well, this is a serious machine, but why not let's have some fun and let's try and create.
Do you still have the code?
No, that went years ago.
I could run it through a model. Make me a graphical adventure from this. Of course.
It was but once again, it's not sticking to what the machine or the language is there for. It's a case of you're limited by your imagination. With all languages. So and that's where I kind of sit with all of this. So
I did play with Elisa. The psychiatrist. Elisa, the basic program. Do you know it?
That.
Yeah. It was fun, this kind of thing. And the game of life. Oh yeah, one of the first game, that really worked out very well. The very first nice thing I made on the Super Bowl was a game of life. The basic one, with cells. When you have less than 2, then they die. When you have more than 3, they die. Yeah. And only when it's good, they grow. So I made it in machine language, 32 by 32, and you had a very good character set for the Super Bowl, the 256 characters with everything to make games, including even a Star Trek ship. This kind of thing. So I could make really the cells nice, and it was ultra fast. Like a 50 FPS game of life. So you can actually see. It was fantastic.
Nice.
And such a simple thing is also you learn a lot. You have got these methods. I don't know if you have played with the game of life, but it's fascinating. You have some shape that stays there and bloop, 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 and you can make scenes that interact and grow, and games with the game. You can move a ship and on the right and have it. It's a fantastic thing.
Nice.
So I did play a lot with this one.
I mean, in terms of the AMOS journey, so we obviously had AMOS, then obviously AMOS Pro, we had AMOS 3D and Easy AMOS. What was the thinking behind the release order of those? So obviously we started with AMOS, which was fantastic.
Oh, so we start with AMOS 1.3, the original one. Then, of course, I wanted to make the compiler.
Yeah.
Having already done a compiler for STOS. And actually making a compiler is quite fun. It's like taking your code and painting on a table. Like that. And then you can slice it up. So then I made a compiler. So after that, it's actually recently QLOC. someone from the Europress software, which came with this idea of making a version for beginners. So I started on Easy AMOS. The major thing that Easy AMOS brought was the monitor with the game inside the debugger. There was no debugger in etc. We reduced, and it was a good product. And Richard Peacock, when they came over there at Europress during the winter, said, "Oh, it is our little fella." Yeah, it was selling very well. And then we needed a new version of AMOS Pro, and so I started on AMOS Pro, and the AMOS Pro compiler, and then I went too far for the compiler. I made my own library system and all this. So this one was a bit, let's move on. And then I had, at the end of AMOS Pro, I had problem with drugs because, it was not legal contract, and somehow I was doing most of the job. So it's okay to pay 30% at the beginning years thank you for taking AMOS and in a suitcase and going to England and all this. But after 5 years, 30% is a bit too much. But I was not as diplomat at the time as I am today. So it ended up, I went there in Paris asking to reduce and slamming the door and then doing nothing and keeping the money, basically. And so, of course, they complained against law. So the end of the Amiga period for me was not fun. And AMOS was also in England, bashed by all the other guys using Blitz and all that, saying that AMOS is crap. Publishers, when they received the AMOS game, it's AMOS. That's the feedback I had.
Do you know, I think the reason for that is because you'd made AMOS so easy, there was some very, very good titles. There's a recent video by Goldfish on Games, and he shows some really amazing titles that were published. But there were obviously some incredibly bad ones because it was so easy. And this has happened now. You used to have the same thing with the Unreal Engine versus Unity. It used to be that Unity games were seen as not good because they weren't Unreal Engine. So it's not an uncommon pattern. It's just, unfortunately, you made it so easy.
Well, it's human nature. It's Atari against Amiga. It's GFA against STOS, and that's it, and I should have accepted it at the time, but at the time it really hurt.
I can understand.
Yeah. So it almost became like a victim of its own success. It was so easy for people, but people weren't thinking and just putting any old stuff out there, which gave it a bad
but it is true that at the time I was called the worst programmer in the world.
No.
And I'm not kidding.
That's crazy.
And the guy, like a couple of years ago, just apologized on Facebook. Thank you. But still. And just to tell you how destiny is so funny. I'm gay, okay? In French, when you are gay, you say PD. PD is a bad word, but it's somehow getting into normal language. And me, I say it.
Mm-hmm.
DP, PD in England, public domain.
Yeah.
So when I was receiving discs from Europress, AMOS PD.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
Come on.
Wow.
Yeah.
This kind of thing. So at the end of AMOS, I wanted to go on the PC and wanted to, because they forbid me to make a language, jokes, with the legal stuff. I couldn't make a language with a graphic engine.
So after the Amiga, you, I assume, then transitioned to the PC, and at some point, Click and Play came about. So do you want to tell us about how that happened?
So it was after AMOS. I couldn't do anything with a language. So I threw the key, and I wanted to go on PC or Mac, but Mac was too expensive, so PC it was. I contacted Yves Lamoureux, and Yves Lamoureux, I met him in 1987 when I was doing the port of Captain Blood on other machine. Captain Blood was a very famous game, French game. You must have heard about it.
Yeah,
made by Philippe Ulrich and Didier Bouchon. And Jacques and Frédéric found me this. Fantastic. Jacques and Frédéric found me this, asked me because they knew the publisher, Era Informatique at the time. They need someone to do the adaptation on Commodore 64 and PC. Commodore 64, I knew it very well because I did Chicken Chase and all this. The PC never worked on it, but okay. So I said yes. And besides STOS, I was also doing Captain Blood. So I went to Air Informatique. I met Ulrich and Philippe Ulrich, pardon, et Didier Bouchon. Philippe Ulrich was the scenarist, the one with the link to Jean-Michel Jarre, etc. Didier Bouchon was the dreamer. He's the coder, he's the one who invented the planets. You have to know that one planet is one 16-bit number. One planet. And grows, and with a very simple fractal all the time. You do it on the plane, and then you wrap it. But it's all done manually, so with just a line that goes slower for the pixel, and that's it. If you don't move the planet, that it's easy. So it's all tricks like that. And I met Yves Lamoureux, who was responsible of the port on the Amstrad CPC. He was the in-house programmer of Air Informatique. Okay, the professor. So I contacted it back at the end of AMOS. Do you want to work on a graphical game engine for PC? And the time was, I need a background programmer. I know nothing about Windows. We want a game group. We have Evans. So at the time, we did not understand that we could have kept the Evans. So, but we made a game group. And Yves sweat a lot. And it was at the time where my wife and I, we moved back to Lyon. And we got a vet clinic built by someone who had a place, and I got an office on the first floor. And we designed, I remember the design of the event editor and of Click and Play was Yves and I on the first floor of the vet clinic in my new office. Okay, let's make a way to code, but only with a mouse. And being a coder myself, I just didn't want a toy. I wanted something to make application and games, something that worked and I could use on a higher level. That's okay, when I make an editor, it's comfortable, but it's most of all, it's a real language. It's a real usable thing, not a toy. And that was it. And then we had the concept. I went back to England, and I will always remember this day in the little room and on the left of the entrance of the Opera Software, with the board, and the whole morning, me talking, etc. At the end, Derek Meeking, the founder of your Opera Software, the English gentleman, the respectable man, incredible man. You did it again, François. Oui, c'était bien. Voilà.
So how well did you find that Click and Play was received?
Same. Well, I was not I was always in France, so I only saw very little. I only saw we had that, etc. But I was not there, so I missed everything. So I've been told that it was well received. But I know it has been well received when we started to go into America to sell it. So I went, the most incredible time of my life was this year's, especially the trip I made with Mich Meekin, who is the son of Derek Meekin, the founder of Europress, and he was at the time the CEO of Europress Software. Okay, so I went with him and we met in New York, I think, and we started to go and see publishers. With that and that, and we did some in New York. We did some, and most of them were in California. We went to San Francisco. We went to see Brotherbone Software, which was a fantastic office in you take the Golden Gate and go into the north. On the left, you have Brotherbone Software and very nice people. And at the time was Brotherbone Software was big, we also went to Berkeley Systems, and this one were pricks. Assholes. What did they invent? They invented toasters. Wow. And they were really pricks. Hated them. And then we went see Maxis. This one was near San Diego, I think. The office were under the sun, two stairs with like a motel. And I met Tim Wright and his partner of the time, Tim Wright, Mr. SimCity. Okay. And me at the time, I had this incredible sinusitis, I don't know, with green pus. And I was snoring all the time during the meeting. But still, and we went to the Mexican restaurant, etc., and visited, and they accepted to publish it, and that's another story. That's an achievement, because STOS and AMOS, no one knew about it in the USA.
Amazing.
Given that where AMOS got to, and then it's kind of, for me, it's still popular in the scene now. I mean, the fact that I do videos on it and I get a lot of comments and feedback on those, and there are still people out there who are either picking it up for the first time or going back to it again, and all the great stuff that Rob does as well in AMOS. Was there ever any thoughts of kind of bringing it back into, well, not into fashion, but what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of modernizing it for the current systems, in terms of, the Amigas now, they've got obviously bigger internal storage and all the rest of it. They're faster machines. Was there thought of maybe doing an AMOS Plus or?
Yeah, of course. Remember AOZ Studio?
Yeah.
So after my divorce in 2014, I think, I went to work for a company called Friend in Norway, created by Hogne Tittelstad. So Hogne Tittelstad was a fan of AMOS. He was a Norwegian guy living in Stavanger with a big brain. He's actually absolute genius guy. He knows the whole story of medieval Vikings and all this. His father is a publisher of big books on the history of the Viking, very well known, etc. So, and he created this company called Friend Software Corporation, whose goal was to make a system called Friend that was to replace Windows. Basically, it was a Chrome OS system with an open source server. Chrome OS, but open source. Don't your data are yours. So basically, if you run the server local, just a machine. You have one server and you have the same Friend machine with the accounts on every display of the house. I want to do that for our Wii. Of course, one machine with the same interface and just sessions on all the screens. And the screen is just a screen, and you have everything is done through the browser. You have one server with your AI model, local, everything through the AWI server. And you have a machine with AWI, magical machine with totally safe agent, MCP, moving the mouse, integrated in the home network, closing the bracket. So, Friend, I joined there. I arrived there on the 1st of July 2017, out of a very bad period in France, and wow, Norway was the first month was really amazing, and me joining such a team of geniuses. Of course, there were Hogne, but there were Thomas. There were Powell. Powell was a programmer, the one who made the server. Pure jewel of Polish design made by Powell, who was a Polish programmer living in Warsaw, working long distance with Hogne in Stavanger. So he came sometimes. So I had my room because I was smoking that at the time already in the back, and yeah, fantastic. And we went to the nature, visited the mountains, because Stavanger is the best place in Norway with all the fjords. You have this big rock where you have James Bond. It's there in Stavanger. I got a nice car. Everything was fantastic. After Norway, I went to Poland. And the first month was really rough because I went crazy and this kind of thing. I can talk later about that. But on 3rd of November, I was in Poland with no work, 2,000 euro on my account. And that's it. And no more family, no nothing. So I got, when I want to finish something, usually you have to finish in Gamer. So I got a really expensive Airbnb for 1,000 euro. Gonna spend the last week before the street there. And that's it. And I made the Patreon for AMOS 2 there. The next day, I had like 500 euro per month already. I was saved. The next month, I find a job at a company called QLOC, which is a fabulous place working on AAA. And I worked there for 9 months, from December to August, on Yakuza 2. The game, it was this company QLOC, where you have a publisher, like a Japanese publisher that made Yakuza 2 on PS2. All the team is gone. Everything is now, there's only one thing left. It's a zip file of several gigabytes with all the tools, everything, all the folders, all in Japanese. No one can be contacted. You're alone. We want the version of PC. QLOC, okay? 10 million lines of code to make work. And for AAA, you not only have, of course, the 11 million lines of code for the game itself, with the 3D engine, the display engine, and this time engine was a Sony engine made by Yakuza coder in C. The physics engine was pure Yakuza style C, and I know it very well. So I arrived when they actually made it work, because the first thing is to make it work. You have all the tools to build, because it's a long building process, and you have tools to make the things to build, like the character, 3D words and everything. Put it in the Word engine so that everyone reacts, and it's an open world. So you go see a character, it can do something else, etc. It was very advantageous at the time, the one of Yakuza. And I arrived when it was working, and they indeed vocal. So they put me on bugs. I worked on the sound engine, and it was a great company. 1/4 of an hour walking distance from my flat in Warsaw. Good pay for the time. The initial meeting with them, the job interview, a big table, cup of tea or coffee, and all the leaders of this team of 10 person, the technical lead asking question. Okay, you have a code, so what do you do? You cannot get into the code. I say, well, you just go when the display pass and the keyboard control like that, and you only display the game. Done. This kind of question, of course, hackers. So fantastic company. And wow, I worked there for 9 months and I had the longest bug of my life, which was the paravent that was falling one time out of two. When you enter the gaming room, a certain PC screen frequency, because the main problem for such sport from strict 60 hertz console, like the PS2, 60 hertz or 50 hertz in Europe, go on PC, display is 0 to 200, and in the back it has to be 1050 or 60, this kind of thing. So that's problems. So 10 days, why did it fall one time out of two, this paravent entering the game room? And I went down to the physics engine with the comment in Japanese, and I can see, to the code where you duplicate machine language, processor, mode 7 processor, this, that, to do this flag. And by coding and making a nice array of code and all this, and couldn't find it. And after 10 days, it was because there was an emergence of interference between the physics engine running at 60 hertz and the display that was valuable, and some frequencies of desynchronization. And as that was a cherry on the cake, as the paravent was not properly put on the floor, it was above. Not this one was badly put by the graphic artist. So when you enter the room, the paravent fell and bounced. But when you had an emergence, it fell. Otherwise, it fell. Don't know.
Wow.
That was possible at QLOC.
Cool.
I've listened, you tell that to someone who do not understand what a geek is, what coding is. Say, okay, I don't care. But it's an adventure, and for you too.
Yeah.
We have lived so much.
That's
what
true.
people don't understand is that the geeks, okay, we're staying in front of the computer, but we are having a very rich life.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yes. What sort of things are you currently doing these days?
All right, a lot of things. The last years I've been I'm a bipolar. I have this disease, which is a slow bipolar. And to be honest with you, and I can tell it, I can talk about it, I have been many times to the hospital, the mental hospital. I spent 2 years and a half of my life in the mental hospital. Or 2 years, something like that. Yeah, but always resisted. Always puked the pills, your toilets, like in the movies. Because if I kept on using the medicine at the exit of the hospital, I could not work. I was making so much bugs and could not work. It's impossible. So I would have had to forget my passion. No. Never. So I always stopped and was again with another crisis and stop, etc. And then you realize that basically if you let go, well, a crisis is the way for the brain to understand why it has been ill. When you're cured out of a crisis and you remember what happened and never two brain were two neurons to analyze, okay, I did that, and it led to this, and that, and this, and that, and you had the milestone of the money, and a crisis. Check. Next one. So each time after a crisis, I was feeling more intelligent. I have a clearer view on things. Everything is more pixel perfect. So after 12 or 7 and 5, 7 really down and 1 awful, and then 5 up, I think I'm cured. And in fact, if you hear how I talk, kind of Rain Man, I think, But I didn't learn the phone book better. So I am doing a lot of things, mostly a server called AWI. AWI is a modular, very simple piece of code, like a server that does everything. The Swift knife of the AI server. I'm using it now. I can tell it. I am doing an application on phones called Sync Nodes. So it's an application. I do it with Richard Vanner. In July, Richard Vanner, so my project manager on STOS at AMOS and Klik and Play, the man I worked with during 15 years between 87 and 2000, contacted me back. He wanted to create a company called Think Apps AI, and he wanted to create an application called Think Node, which is a note-taking AI-driven application. Basically, you put the phone and you record, and at the end, you have a report about this, about that, who said this, the to-do list, blah, blah, blah. So I started to work in July. It was kind of a rocky development because I do tend to have a lot of ideas. So poor Richard, but we have something now. So Sync Nodes has a major difference compared to Wave or the competitors is that it works with experts. Basically, the association of two models with different personalities. That the one has a view on the meeting, and like the view of a CEO, and the other has the view of the accountant, for example. And get one view, get another view, then the third one who's synthesized out of the two very different views, and at the end you have a report about the meeting of the view of the CEO thinking about accounting.
Okay.
You see? And so what we've done, we've taken the structure of a company and we've put it like that. So we've got CEO, CFO, all this, accountant, graphic design, marketing, and you make teams of experts. And then I will show you, you can talk, get a report, and then you can talk about it and all this. And of course, there is the battery problem. I remember, I have this ability. Of course, I can remember every second of my life. If you ask me, remember this day, I won't say, okay, I did that. But you spot something that you did in this month, and then you think about another memory that brings you back, closer. And I was on the terrace doing this.
Wow, that has been absolutely fascinating. There's so much I've learned about you that I didn't know, and some of your history. It's just absolutely fascinating, and I really want to thank you for spending some time with us today. It's just been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thank you very much for
so much.
for your passion. You're my son somehow, or from this one.
No, I think as Rob said, this has been fascinating getting an insight into how...
And I have that as well. I played
Oh, wow.
There's still so much about you we don't know. Once again, just want to really thank you for your time. It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much for all your time as well. Thank you very much. And I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, definitely.